New Zealand taking all the best players in the Pacific and making them All Blacks. That's the topic for today. It's kind of come up because of New Zealand beating Tonga by 102 points to nil. The old story about, well, of course they beat them by 102 nil. All their best players are playing for the All Blacks comes up again. So we'll talk about that, a little bit about the All Blacks squad, the scholarships thing that goes on, a little bit about eligibility, and you guys can let me know your thoughts on how things are. I will say, to answer the question, do New Zealand poach all the best players and make them All Blacks? The answer is simply no. No. Are there exceptions? Are there a handful? Yes. But is the vast majority of the All Blacks either born or raised in New Zealand? Yes. Sorry to say. Of the squad that beats Tonga 102-0, none of them were born in Samoa, Fiji, or Tonga. Not one. Doesn't really fit with the narrative. But, I mean, I am ignorant as to things that go on across the other side of the world. There are certainly issues in countries on the other side of the world I would no idea about. New Zealand demographics are probably pretty foreign to people who are sitting on the other side of the world, so it's kind of understandable that people don't understand that. That's fine. But let me tell you, the 23-man squad that beat Tonga, Akira Ioane, Tyrell Lomax, and Finlay Christie were only foreign-born guys. Akira Ioane was born in Japan. Finlay Christie was born in Scotland, came to New Zealand at age 7. Akira, I forgot to mention, was raised in New Zealand. His dad was over there playing rugby. That's when he was born there. And Tyrell Lomax is the closest to a poach from Australia. New Zealand dad. His son was born and raised in Canberra. So he played Aussie under-20s. They got the call up from Australia, but eventually headed back to New Zealand. So if you look at the squad a bit wider, though, it does have guys born in the Pacific Islands. Nepo Laulala, born in Samoa, became eligible for New Zealand from 2007. 3-year residency would have made him, I think, come to New Zealand around about age 13. Now, there's potential for a scholarship at 13, but I would imagine probably with his brother being an All Black, he probably just moved to New Zealand with the family, but I don't know that. I haven't asked him. Aidan Ross, born in Australia, went to high school, played under-20s in New Zealand, so essentially a locally raised product. But when you look at Sevu Reece, that guy did come to New Zealand on a rugby scholarship. Shannon Frizzell did come to New Zealand on a development contract with Tasman's Academy. And Samasoni Takiaho is not yet an All Black, neither is Aidan Ross, but Takiaho did also come to New Zealand on a rugby scholarship. So we got 3 guys in the squad who have come to New Zealand for the purpose of kind of rugby development. So whilst the majority of the squad is not, there are a few exceptions. But like, if you're thinking of the All Blacks, like when you think famous All Blacks, like who are you thinking of? Are you thinking Dan Carter? Are you thinking Richie McCaw, John Olomu, Tana Umanga, like Carlos Spencer? You know, famous All Blacks. Let's go have a look at them. Some most capped All Blacks. McCaw, born in New Zealand. Mealamu, born in New Zealand. Reid, born in New Zealand. Whitelock, born in New Zealand. Woodcock, Franks, Nonu, all born in New Zealand. Mills Muliaina was born in Samoa. Came to New Zealand age 2. Alright? You kind of see where I'm going with this. Top try scorers for the All Blacks. Doug Howlett, Julian Savea, Christian Cullen, all born in New Zealand. Joe Rokotoko, born in Fiji. Came to New Zealand age 5. Jeff Wilson, Ben Smith, John Olomu, born in New Zealand. Tana Umanga, John Kerwin, born in New Zealand. Right. Born in New Zealand is a pretty common thing. Doesn't really matter what your surname is. You guys may know Simon Raiwalui, former Fiji international. He said on Twitter, he's like the Fiji manager at the moment, just because a player's surname is of Pacific Island heritage doesn't mean they have been taken from the islands. Born, bred, raised, developed in New Zealand means they are from New Zealand with Pacific Island heritage. Let's get this taken mindset out of our heads. I think he makes a fair point. I found my old school photo from 1995. 1995. Let me read you some of the boys' surnames, if that makes a difference for you. Mulianga Lovell, Wood, Fafita, Lynch, Herewini, Henry, Karen, Alotama, Dudden, Wharepapa, Ashby, Whaianu, Teng, Morgan, Buchan, Liang, Moanu, and Khan. New Zealanders have a whole heap of different surnames. That's just a thing. We're a country which has a lot of immigration. There you go. Kind of reflected in our rugby team. There you go. So what about the exceptions, though? Because there are these scholarships. The scholarships for guys to come and play rugby from a young age. The scholarships do go on. They're not really headed by New Zealand Rugby, obviously. That's more of a high schools thing for the most part. High schools, New Zealand Rugby high school competitions are pretty competitive over here. They all want to get a competitive edge over each other. Some of them do go looking to the Pacific for players to get extra talent. That's a fact. That is true. They will scour and scout the Pacific, trying to find guys to improve their rugby team. Their argument being, we give them an education and pay for their fees. These guys get better coaching and training, and it's kind of win-win. We get a good player, they get a good chance to develop and improve. So it's kind of win-win. Now, of all the guys that get those scholarships, which there would be loads every year, there's a handful who have played for the All Blacks. There's a lot more, I would imagine, who have played for other countries, not New Zealand, because it's pretty hard to get in the All Blacks. Not many guys have. A few have cracked it. The more recent examples would be Malakai Fekitoa came to New Zealand on a rugby scholarship. Apparently he asked for a scholarship. He asked Wesley College if he could get a scholarship. He ended up getting one, played 20 odd times for the All Blacks. You've got Waisake Naholo, same thing, rugby scholarship, came to New Zealand and played 20 odd times for the All Blacks. Seta Tamanivalu was another one, got a scholarship, played for the All Blacks 3 times. Casey Laulala got a scholarship, played for the All Blacks a couple of times. So yeah, there are a few guys who've gone through the system, but like for everyone that's come to New Zealand on a scholarship and played for the All Blacks, there's ones who don't. Manasa Mataele went through an academy system here in New Zealand, played for Fiji. Taulafo, the prop, 40 odd caps for Samoa, came to New Zealand on a rugby scholarship, ended up representing Samoa. Alapati Leua came to New Zealand, I think at age 16. Wanted to hang out with his brother, who was also in the Samoa national team. Had a chance maybe to play for the All Blacks, was the rumour at the time. Ended up playing for Samoa. Nathan Hughes came to New Zealand on a rugby scholarship. Ended up playing for England. So all these guys have their own reasons for choosing whichever one they do. Why Fekitoa chose New Zealand instead of Tonga, you kind of have to ask him. Maybe because the All Blacks are a more successful team. Maybe he always dreamed of playing for the All Blacks. I don't know. Nathan Hughes was pretty open that he played for England instead of Fiji because he could get more money that way. A lot of these guys send money back home. Manasa Mataele, I don't know why he chose Fiji. We haven't seen it. He never was selected for the All Blacks, so that could potentially be a reason why. Everyone's got their own reason. But, yeah, I guess there's an argument that New Zealand should never be choosing these players. Now, I should say, New Zealand has called in, and he's a good example, Samasoni Takiaho. He is a reserve hooker. He's been in New Zealand since 2014. Came to New Zealand on a rugby scholarship. 2014, so it's like 7 years he's been in New Zealand. He hasn't been an All Black yet, but he's in the squad, so he could potentially be our latest All Black. Now, you could make an argument that the All Blacks shouldn't select him. Is 7 years enough to justify selecting for the All Blacks? Maybe, maybe not. Apparently, Tonga called him up in 2019, and he refused the call because he wanted to give the All Blacks a crack. He's working on a law degree, so you could argue the scholarship's been pretty beneficial for him and that he's getting something non-rugby out of it as well. He may get a career out of it. So, I don't know, man. Like, most of the scholarships are for guys at 16-ish, but I have seen scholarships going a bit younger, and they do make me a bit uncomfortable as well, man. When you're seeing guys who are what we would call intermediate over here, like middle school, I guess, like coming to New Zealand for rugby scholarships, that does feel pretty young. But I'm assuming the families are happy to send them because, again, it's a chance for them to develop and a chance for them to get a better education, maybe. Yeah, so it's kind of up to the individuals as to whether they think that's a good idea for them or not. Being away from their family is obviously very tough. So it's a big, big decision to make. I've seen there's internal debate in the Pacific itself about, you know, whether you should be promoting these guys to try and look for scholarships, right? Because if you send 20 away, of those 20, maybe, you know, 5 are good enough to play professional rugby. And then of those 5, maybe the best one will get selected for the All Blacks if it was New Zealand they went to. And then the other 4 maybe end up representing whatever country of their birth was. Maybe. You could argue that's a good return. You could argue you lose your best player. That's a bad deal. Don't know. It's kind of up to the individuals to decide. But I should say, we do kind of wrongly lump these 3 in together. Tonga, Samoa and Fiji. They're all very different. One similarity, if you look at the 2019 Rugby World Cup, is the majority of the Samoan and Tongan teams were made up of Kiwis with Tongan or Samoan parents. The Fijian squad, no, mostly homegrown. I think only 4. Whereas, the number of Kiwis and Samoans, Kiwis in the Samoan squad and Kiwis in the Tongan squad was, like the lion's share. So it's a wee bit different. We shouldn't lump them all in together, but there are kind of some similarities. Maybe New Zealand should be doing what France does and say, you have to have a New Zealand passport before you can become an All Black. Because in 2016, France made that change that, if you wanted to play for the French national team, you had to have a French passport. And they've reduced their number of kind of foreign players. They're trying to grow more locally born talent. So maybe that's one thing that we could look at for kind of eligibility. World Rugby is, remember, extending the eligibility criteria a bit longer. So that may make some changes as well going forward. But are New Zealand poaching the best players from the Pacific? I don't think so. The majority of the All Black squad now and historically is born and raised in New Zealand. It's our national game. If I walk 20 minutes that way, there's a rugby field. If I walk 20 minutes that way, there's a rugby field. If I go to my son's school, there's a rugby field. There's a rugby field everywhere. It's just our national game. I would say that's probably the main reason New Zealand's pretty good at rugby. Not because we poach the best players from around the world, but we have been known to take a few. I wouldn't say it's drastically more than anybody else. I would say, if anything, New Zealand is a much larger exporter of rugby talent than an importer. But anyway, people will have their own kind of opinions about that. So, you guys do let me know your thoughts on this issue, if you think it is an issue. I mean, some of the stuff I see online, like about Charles Piutau not playing for Tonga. Well, the guy was born in New Zealand, raised in New Zealand, and played for New Zealand. So the conversation about eligibility and should these guys be able to do a stand-down period and they represent the Pacific nations, maybe that's a good one to be having. But I think that's a separate one from New Zealand pinching the players, personally. But anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts. I forgot to mention Jerome Kaino, Jerry Collins, and Mills Muliaina, all former All Blacks. Came to New Zealand like 2 years old, 4 years old. Yeah, there's a few foreign-born ones, but the majority are not poachers. Forgot to mention, there's one really good movie. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. By former Samoan international Dan Leo. Oceans Apart, Greed, Betrayal, and Pacific Rugby is a really good look at some of the issues facing Pacific Rugby. A bit about corruption, about guys not getting paid, about what could be done in terms of helping out the Pacific nations. It's a really good look. It debunks some of the kind of stereotypes also about what's going on, and also some of the kind of pretty serious issues that some of the Pacific nations are facing. So yes, Oceans Apart by Dan Leo is definitely a really good watch. I did a review of it when I watched it. It was a couple of bucks for me in New Zealand on Vimeo. I think maybe check Amazon, just Google it, and you should be able to find it. Dan Leo's Oceans Apart. Also a really good watch. Right, I'm going to head off. Take care, guys. Bye.